My name is Miguel Zárate, and I am the Training Advisory Committee representative for the Central Nervous System section.
And I'm Gosia Kashtan, and I'm a TAC representative for the renal section.
We will both moderating today's presentations. The topic of the second session is Next Generation Scientist Identity, and it will discuss about the main things that trainees need to do after graduate school to become successful in the academic or industry world. Without further ado, I will introduce to both the speakers. First of all, we will have Dr. Michelle Gumz, an associate professor for the University of Florida College of Medicine. She will be followed by Dr. Carrie Northcott, director and research project lead at the company Pfizer. And now, we're going to start the presentation, The Next Generation Scientist, Career Transitions, Academia Edition, by Dr. Michelle Gumz, Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Florida.
Thank you so much, Miguel and Gosia, for the invitation today. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today to talk about the academic version of career transitions and what's next after graduate school. So in terms of what's next steps, it's important to think ahead. So where do you want to go next? And I want to start off by telling you a little bit about me and my timeline. And this is just going to serve as an outline for the rest of my talk today. So I'm going to focus on productivity and give you some writing tips. No matter where you want to go, being productive and getting your work published is important. So we'll have some writing tips. We'll talk about building your CV. Then I want to talk about the benefits of Twitter. We had a really great webinar a couple of weeks ago talking about the use of social media and reaching large audiences. But today I want to focus on the use of Twitter for networking and finding a job. So we'll have the pandemic edition of networking, talking about some virtual ways that we can stay connected. And then I have a little bit on work-life balance and a note on mentorship. So in terms of where I'm coming from, as Miguel said, I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida. My lab studies the circadian clock in the kidney. So we use renal physiology and molecular biology in order to understand how circadian clock proteins affect renal function and blood pressure. And so because I think a lot about circadian rhythms, I'm going to bring that in for some of my productivity tips later. And so this is just some pictures of my lab in the lower left-hand corner. Back when we used to be able to go to meetings in person, that was experimental biology in San Diego with some of the first students I had in my laboratory. The Gumz lab circa 2019. Emilio, who's down there, the bottom left, is the one who made our lab logo, little sleeping kidney there. And then the pandemic version of the lab where we've been meeting via Zoom. So I just want to share my timeline with you, how my academic career path started. So I got my bachelor's degree at the University of California, Riverside back in 1999, and then moved to the University of Florida, where I got my PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. And then I did a short postdoc in cancer biology at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. I wrote an F-32 at that time, but it was not funded. And then shortly after that, I moved back to the University of Florida, and I was a T32 fellow and later was able to get an American Heart Association fellowship. And during this time, 6 long years of postdocing, I was pretty tired, but I persevered and started a tenure track position at UF in 2010. And I've listed some of my funding here. And when it's listed like this, it looks like a lot, but this actually was over a long time period. It took quite a while to get that first R01 funded, which happened in 2017. And then in 2018, oh, happy day, I was finally promoted to associate professor with tenure. On this slide, I want to show you the things that you don't typically see on someone's CV. So we often see the polished end result, but we don't see all the setbacks and other life events that happen along the way. So as part of my timeline, I had my first daughter when I was a graduate student and my second daughter when I was a postdoc. And unfortunately, I was sick after that. And that happened again right after I started my faculty position. And we had some setbacks in the lab. We, too late, caught a breeding mistake by our facility that resulted in losing one of our mouse colonies that was really important for our work. So definitely had some moments like this, but we just kept moving forward. And now here we are in 2020. This is my family up here, my husband Keith and our 2 daughters who are now teenagers. So in terms of productivity, I want to share with you the best advice that I think I have ever received. And it's related to writing. So the best advice that I feel I've received came from Dr. Rick Johnson, who was our nephrology division chief back when I was a postdoc. And he said, focus on publishing, be productive, and someone somewhere will fund your research. And this has definitely been true for my lab. Even when those NIH grants didn't come through, we were able to secure funding from several different foundations. So what does this productivity and writing look like in practice? Well, I think for practical considerations, don't start more projects than you can finish. And finishing really requires focus. And sometimes that's difficult if you've got many collaborations going on. But you want to carve out time for writing every day. And it's also important to think about what that means. It doesn't always mean that you're just typing away, generating, a couple thousand words or something like that. Sometimes that means you're spending time developing figures for a manuscript. Sometimes that means you're reading papers so that you can really be familiar with the relative literature. It's also important to have a plan for publications and to be strategic. So what we do in my lab, every paper that we publish starts out as just a PowerPoint. We'll have maybe a figure or 2. We have an outline for the experiments that we're planning. And as we develop those figures and build that into each of our slides, we use that PowerPoint function like a storyboard. And sometimes we might rearrange the order in which we present our figures. And then in terms of being strategic, what I mean by this is thinking about a couple of different things. So one might be timing. Maybe you're getting ready to submit a grant application and you want that paper to hopefully be published, so that your reviewers can see it and note your productivity when they review your grant application. Something else to consider in terms of strategy is impact factor. Sometimes you're working towards, maybe a top tier journal, which is going to require more figures and more time. And other times, maybe you're going to have a shorter story that's going to be complete, but maybe not go into as high of an impact journal. So it's important to think about that in your planning. And then one of the things I always try to advise, especially students, is to avoid doing experiments that are not directly connected to a planned manuscript. And sometimes this is difficult. Your PI might come to you months or weeks before a grant deadline and say, oh, I really need you to do this one experiment or run this one assay. And grants are the lifeblood of a laboratory. So sometimes you just have to do that. But this is something to think about in terms of really pushing forward on your own first author research. And then the other thing that I try to emphasize is that perfect is the enemy of done. So a lot of times I know what holds me up in my writing is thinking, oh, this draft is terrible. And I'm waiting for some imaginary time point in the future when I'm going to be able to sit down and write something that's flawless. And that just never happens. So it's always good to finish a draft, to push through, give yourself a deadline if that's what works for you. And remember that editing is often easier than the original writing. So the other advice that I like to give, sort of relative to that idea of there being a perfect time and place to write your paper or to write your dissertation. So I like to encourage students to write where you are. And so just an example of this from my own career, this paper was published in 2010. It was my last first author paper from my postdoc training. And I actually wrote most of that paper in the summer of 2009. And I was having issues with childcare. I had a 6-year-old at the time. And so she did a kids club swimming activity in our neighborhood. And I sat right there at the edge of the pool and wrote the bulk of this manuscript. And then another time that I did that was for my last author paper from the lab, that was published in Hypertension in 2012. And I wrote the bulk of that paper in the summer of 2011 when we had to move to Houston for me to have treatment at MD Anderson. So some days, maybe I only managed a couple of sentences, but it's important to think about that in terms of reaching our goals, that sometimes baby steps are the way to go. So in terms of being productive, the best advice I think I have to give is to really know yourself. So this is one of my favorite Far Side cartoons. I say this quite often. Well, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm doing renal physiology, so I know what my strengths are. So it's good to know yourself and know your strengths. And depending on how you work, if your least favorite part of writing a manuscript is maybe formatting references or something like that, maybe it's better to, save that until the very end. It's also important to try to block out time on your calendar every day for writing. And as I mentioned previously, sometimes that's not actually typing words. Sometimes that's figure preparation and getting caught up with the literature. And it's also good in terms of knowing yourself. Do you write best in the morning or at night? Are you a night owl or an early bird? And this is where I bring in harnessing the power of your circadian rhythm. So if you know you're a night owl, maybe you sit down and get your best writing done after everyone else in your household has gone to sleep. And then it's also important to think about how you recharge. And this is something I didn't have a lot of appreciation for in my younger years, but the older I get, the more I realize I really need some downtime. So it's good to know what helps you recharge your batteries. For me, I like to sit down and read a novel, for example. So I try to make time for that a couple days a week. So moving on now to building your CV. And in terms of academia, this is really the story of your life. You want to track everything you do. For your CV, there's no page limits. And so you can really just keep track of all your activities. Funding and publications are the most important. So you want those to go up at the top. You want to keep updating your abstracts and posters all along the way. Sometimes this seems like it becomes a really long laundry list, but it's also a good idea to keep track of which of those posters turn into papers. And this is another way that I kind of keep track of my own productivity. I look back over, posters we presented at meetings. Has that story turned into a manuscript yet? And if it hasn't, why not? It can help keep you on track and keep you focused. Other things that can go on your CV that are important are service activities and public outreach. So maybe that means a science fair that you judged at a local school, or maybe writing a blog post. You can have a section on that. In terms of teaching, maybe teaching isn't one of your career goals, but these are things you do in the lab that you might not think about in terms of teaching, maybe training undergraduates or your peers in the lab in terms of performing a particular method. And then, of course, any honors and awards that you receive should go onto your CV, and invited presentations. And so sometimes those might be, smaller. It's not always an invitation that you get to give an oral presentation at a meeting. Maybe a collaborator has asked you to give a research presentation to their group. That also counts as an invited presentation. And then mentorship and peer review. So as graduate students and especially later as postdoctoral fellows, you're likely to be mentoring more junior students in the laboratory. And it's a great idea to keep track of that because it helps build your track record as a mentor. And then as you move on in your career, hopefully your PI is also helping you develop peer review skills. So a lot of journals now have a space in the review portfolio where they can note whether or not they were assisted in their review by a junior colleague. And so I do try to, every once in a while, bring in a graduate student or a postdoc from our lab group, invite them to read the paper with me, come up with their own list of critiques, and then we work on the final version of the peer review together. And then I'm able to give them credit for that. And a lot of journals have junior peer review programs. So I'm an associate editor for the American Journal of Physiology, Renal Physiology. And so AJP Renal is offering one of these junior peer review programs now that you can apply for to get experience in that area. So moving on now to Twitter. I like this particular cartoon. You know, she says, well, it's all very well making discoveries and saving lives, but your research is making barely any impact on social media. So sometimes you might think about social media like, oh, is there really just one more thing I have to do on top of, you know, doing experiments and writing papers and looking for a job? But I want to present Twitter as a way to multitask in a way. And I just want to point you here, these links should be active for you, that this symposium, this webinar was given just a couple of weeks ago. And Dr. Kelly Heinemann had some really great tips on getting involved in Twitter in particular. So why Twitter? I've got my handle down here. Well, I think it's a great way to do a lot of different things. So it's a great way to look for a job. I follow Dr. Delisle at the University of Kentucky because of his interest in circadian rhythms. And I saw that he posted this just a couple of weeks ago. And I see this really frequently, especially right after people receive notice of awards for their grants, that Twitter is often the first place they go to advertise open positions in their lab. So this might be a way to find a postdoc position. It's really great for networking as well, especially in this time that we find ourselves in, where we're having to social distance and work from home a lot, that you can connect with people through shared interest. And one of the ways you can do that is by searching for different types of hashtags. And so here, if you were looking for a postdoc position and you're a physiologist, you might just search for these two tags and come across some opportunities that way. I also find it a great way to keep up with the literature. I sometimes beat my colleagues to a brand new paper that gets tweeted about before it ever shows up on PubMed. And it's also a great way to expand your horizons. So I follow some people, who are not in my direct area. Danielle Lee is one of them. She's one of the first people I followed when I joined Twitter back in 2012. You need to write more is her top picture there, which is great advice. She works in a completely different area than I do. She's a mammologist and she does field work in Africa, but it's fascinating to me to follow what she does and really learn about a different area. And then Twitter's also really great for entertainment. So this is a person I follow who does the best puns. If an experiment doesn't go well, drown your sorrows at our new pub, the Error Bar. So great science-themed, puntastic posts from Dr. Caroline Bartman. So in terms of virtual networking in this time that we find ourselves in, another thing that Twitter is really great for is it allows you to follow meeting hashtags. And here I've used an example from the American Society of Nephrology Kidney Week. And this is actually from 2 years ago, but I found this by searching for Dr. Cruz and the Kidney Week hashtag. And so this is a great way to follow along with different meetings. And this is great whether we're in a pandemic or not, because sometimes you might not be able to attend a particular conference, but you can follow along with what people are talking about by following those hashtags on Twitter. You can search for people from labs you're interested in for postdocs, tweet about papers that you're reading and tag the authors. And you can find your community, whether you have an interest in, physiology or science. Raven, the science maven, is a really fun person to follow. She's really active in science communication. And so those SciComm hashtags are another great thing to follow. Another way to increase your networking is to be very active with your professional society. So I've used here the American Physiological Society as an example. APS has been my scientific home for a long time. Under their professional development tag up here, there is a wealth of information. There are job boards there, different training opportunities like writing and reviewing courses that APS offers. Another society that I belong to is the Biochemistry Society, and I've included a link here. This is particularly relevant to next steps, and if you're searching for a postdoc position, this is a blog detailing how to write a cold email. So how to develop an email to someone you've never met before, and it has very practical advice. So another silver lining with this time that we're living in right now are all these virtual seminars and webinars. So you can connect with people across the world that you might not otherwise have been able to meet with. In terms of interviewing virtually, you want to make sure you have time to practice your virtual seminar. It's a little different talking over Zoom, for example, than talking in person. When you are interviewing with a potential postdoc lab, ask for meetings with other lab members. This is something you might miss out on since it would be a virtual visit versus an in-person visit. But I know several people who visited labs that seemed great, was going to be a great fit, and then someone from the lab takes them aside at lunchtime and says, you don't want to come here. And so those types of interactions can be very helpful in terms of keeping yourself out of negative situations. And then you want to be prepared with questions too for a potential postdoc mentor. What's their mentoring style? And if you want to go on in academia, it's important to know if you'll be allowed to take part of your postdoc project with you in order to establish your own lab. And then another note on interviewing, I just want to say in terms of academia career pursuits, really, I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking about it. In terms of PIs finding funding for new postdoc fellows, it's good to have as much notice as possible. And then you can also set up your own virtual hangout, like inviting another lab to join you for a journal club. So in these last couple of slides, I just want to talk about work-life balance. And like this little cartoon shows, it's really much more of a teeter-totter. I wrote this article a couple of years ago, and it really has some tips on harnessing your circadian rhythm and your own chronotype in terms of being most productive. And the secret is really getting enough sleep. And then I have as an example, in terms of schedule blocking, this is Precious Ashite. She was an undergraduate in our lab a couple of years ago. She's now a medical student at the University of Florida. And you can see here, and I've included in the toolkit handout as well, examples of how she blocked out time in her schedule to have free time, exercise, sleep, and also accomplish all of her academic goals. And then on mentoring, one of the things I want to emphasize here, what you're looking for in a mentor might be an advisor, a sponsor, an advocate, a coach. But this is often not going to be found in just one person. So you really need to think about developing a mentoring team and not look just to your advisor to fulfill all of these roles. And in some cases, a coach or a friend-tor, as I like to think of them, might be your peers, and you can help encourage each other. So in terms of that, it's important to be an active mentee to really maintain communication with your mentor and your advisor. And then also to think about an individual development plan that will help you keep your goals on track. So in summary, what I hope we can do today is take that pandemic life frown and turn it upside down so that we're excited for science again. So we've covered writing tips today, developing your CV, staying connected, and if you're searching for a postdoc position, using virtual tools like Twitter can be very effective. Maintaining work-life balance. As next generation scientists, you really get to set the culture where you can maintain some work-life balance. Building a team of mentors is important as well. So that is the end of what I have to present today. And I'm so excited to share this information with you, and I'll look forward to questions after Carrie finishes her talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gumz, for a very insightful presentation. And I'll take that message at the end that you say, sometimes we all forgive as a scientist that we need to have a balance with our personal life and our career. This is very important for our own health and personal satisfaction as well. Once again, thank you very much. We will have next Dr. Carrie Northcott. She is a director and research project lead of the Digital Medicine and Translational Imaging Group in Early Clinical Development at Pfizer. And the topic of her presentation will be the Next Generation Scientists, Career Transitions, Industry Edition.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. And I'm sorry my title is such a mouthful. We always use acronyms, so it gets a lot shorter in my space. So thank you very much for APS for the opportunity to talk and give my aspect or my points of view and thoughts about getting a career in industry. Today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about myself, similar to what Dr. Gumz spoke of. Kind of challenge you with different types of careers in pharma. Talk about some first steps, networking, online presence, resume, cover letter from the different point of view, from the industry point of view. I call this opening the door and not stumbling, how to get through that interview, and that some of the differences between an academic and an industry interview, and some final thoughts. And these are my opinions. They're not necessarily representative of Pfizer. So we always like to start a little bit about myself, and you'll notice my work and professional experiences at the top, but I'm going to start at the bottom with my personal experience or my personal life. And I like to do this because it is really important to have that work-life balance. And I just wanted to say I have a great family. Throughout all of my career, I've had the benefit of being married to a great man in Bill. He's actually a computational scientist fellow, an ag engineer at Nutrien, and actually was a co-founder of a startup called AgriBull, which was bought by Nutrien. So I have science all around me. I have two great sons, Ethan 16, Justin 12, and I have a variety of hobbies. Some are a little different than most. I like to blacksmith. It's a good way to take out stress, I've learned. And I always like to say I'm a farm girl from Illinois that now lives on the East Coast, and I'm always up for new adventures. And I think my career path has identified that. And as I head into my professional experience, I PhD it was from Michigan State University in pharmacology, toxicology, with some physiology as well. But before that, I was actually an ag major. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in agriculture, so I kind of just switched once I went to my PhD. And I continued to switch as I went on throughout my career. I was at Michigan State University as a postdoc and also joined as an assistant professor. Was there for several years. I really enjoyed academics. However, there were some things that were missing in my life. I wanted some more excitement and more diversity. So I opted to look to industry and had the opportunity to join Pfizer in 2012 in global safety pharmacology. Specifically, I worked in cardiovascular safety. So with that role, we worked at all the preclinical safety aspects for the whole portfolio. So I worked soup to nuts across all the different groups and looked at all of the preclinical animal models and cardiovascular findings. I worked there for a number of years. I was a principal scientist, became a senior principal scientist. I led a lot of great teams there. I got really excited to learn about digital, and I wanted to understand translation of preclinical findings to clinical findings. And so I started a small project on the side. Yes, you can still get grant money and do kind of fun things on the side, even in industry. And that kind of led to my next career change in digital medicine and translational imaging. And I've been there now for a little over 3 years. I started as a senior manager and now a director, and I've always been a project lead. So I wanted to take a second and kind of talk to you about where I'm at now. So within digital medicine translational imaging, or we call it DMTI, we're really looking at how to use digital wearables and devices in clinical studies. So most clinical studies look like this, and that you're at a home and you go to visits in the clinic and you're going there in person. In reality, right now, it looks more like this, where you're wearing your mask and you're going into your mask clinic. And that's if you can go in person. Often it's done via telehealth. Unfortunately, a lot of these visits, and as patients will identify, these are really subjective in the respect of you're going at one point in time. And you're only getting that snapshot in time you're providing to your clinician. And it's also time consuming. It requires scheduling. It requires a lot of effort on both parts. So what if we could make physicians' visits more patient-centric? So this is where my new role is working in digital assessments. And can we use digital devices, Apple Watches, different types of watch devices? A lot of us carry phones, different types of devices to actually quantitatively measure physiological conditions at home and be able to send that information to your clinic and kind of have some real-time feedback back and forth, providing that extra context and also providing a lot more information about the conditions as we move forward. So that's what I'm doing now. In fact, this is kind of our goal, and I want to put this up there because I want to really illustrate that within pharma, even within digital medicine or our clinical asset projects, et cetera, we really work team-based. We always have the patient in mind, and we have a many, many different people that work on these teams. And we have that also within our own microcosm of DMTI. We always start with a question. I lead a team that's looking at nighttime scratch and sleep. And we go and determine, is it meaningful to patients? And this goes across not only digital devices, but also any type of asset or drug that we're looking for in drug development. What kind of information is required? What kind of data? Can we collect that data to meet the user specifications? So in this case, can we use a digital device? With regards to digital devices, can we maintain data security? How do we analyze this data? We're able to now identify nighttime scratching and sleep episodes with a simple wrist-worn wearable or a watch-like device. We need to make sure that those measurements that we get are valid and are verified. And we also have to meet all the regulatory requirements, and ultimately, again, all our endpoints need to be meaningful to the patient and clinician. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And I wanted to tell you that journey because I wanted you to understand how you can go from different aspects. I looked at cardiovascular signaling and hypertension when I was in graduate school. I went in to study the brain and looked at neural signaling. I moved into cardiovascular safety, and now I'm in digital medicine. So there's a lot of different changes of that. Working in industry has provided me those opportunities to kind of continue to evolve myself and learn. And that kind of leads into what is pharmaceutical industry. So one of the number one things I hear is, I want to join industry. And then I say, what part of industry? And they kind of look at me. And I want everyone to kind of realize our real goal of industry is to develop those effective and safe medicines for treatment of a disease or a condition. We always have our patients first. Everything needs to be cost effective, and we answer to our stockholders is something to realize. But when you go into industry, there's a lot of different positions. It's a beast, if you will. We have everything from preclinical and chemistry, developing matter to work with and leads to work with, testing those for both safety, toxicity, efficacy. And those are all in preclinical models, both from cellular cell culture to in vivo models in mice and rats and large animals. From there, you go into your phase 1 safety. This is your first in human. You're starting to test safety and efficacy. Now you're in the clinical side. There's really a transition from preclinical to clinical. Then you head into your phase 2, looking at your efficacy as well as safety. Phase 3 is much larger studies, and then you go for your FDA review and approval. There's also then a phase 4 on a commercial side too. So there's a lot of different aspects and roles that you can actually obtain throughout this different aspect of an industry role. With that said, here's a poll I wanted to ask everyone, and please go ahead and click on it. What type of position are you desiring? So this is something as you head into whether it be academics or industry, you really need to think about it. So please select which one you'd like. Everything from an academic faculty to teaching positions. Are you going to do bench research? Do you want to do regulatory in industry, clinical work, medical writing? There's scientific leads. These are actually non-bench positions. And that was one role that I originally had, where I lead a team that works at the bench. Project managers, people managers, and just other. There's a lot of different types of roles. So part of the reason I put this forward was really, I wanted you to start thinking about these, and there's different aspects and career types that you can have. And these are important things to identify as you head into whether it be your academic journey or your industry journey, and how to target those job searches. So it's great. It's wonderful to see a number of faculty positions as well as people wanting to work throughout the space and industry. And I'm glad to see that people are thinking about that. No others. I'm impressed. I think I still categorize myself as another. So with that said, what do you want to do? As I stated, there's a lot of different types of positions. I started in the safety pharmacology toxicology arena. It allowed us to work across the portfolio with one specific area. You can also go into specific on the research side, looking at a specific pathway, a drug asset, and those are more bench-based positions. You can lead a team that's looking at that. There's regulatory affairs. How are you going to interact with the FDA and other types of position? These are different career opportunities. I spent last week kind of clicking out some different things to look at. I think one of the challenging things is going to the different websites for the various pharmas and identifying what position will work for you. So if you're coming right off of graduate school, there are opportunities for postdocs within industry. I think the first couple are up top. Several of these actually have industry programs where you come in for a short period of time and they kind of give you different flavors of industry for you to kind of test out. Others are true postdoc positions. In fact, I just got our announcement to put in applications for postdocs. So we do take postdocs in industry, and it's a great way to understand how industry works and have a lot of different resources available to see if that's the career type you want to do. We still publish, etc. You don't necessarily have to have a postdoc to come into a pharma type industry position. As identified some of these other roles, you're going to be looking for roles that have maybe a small amount of experience. If you already have a postdoc, that can be applied as well. I've interacted with people that have come straight out of graduate school. Those have been postdocs, and myself who were also faculty before I came into industry. And I tried to identify different links throughout different companies that are available, everything from medical science liaisons, where you like to communicate, to basic scientist positions in different types of areas. But I'm going to encourage you to look for some different types of wording. And just because I worked in intracellular signaling, there's not necessarily a job role for that. So you have to keep your options open as you read those different job ads. So similar to academia, you want to network. Network. I can't emphasize that enough. Go to the networking events. So similar to meetings, I attend meetings as well. There are smaller niche meetings that you can go to. Even in the virtual situation, I just had one several weeks ago, we could have one-on-one meetups. I had 3 or 4 people just say, hey, can we chat? And we were able to put into meetings just like this and have our discussions. We introduced ourselves, we had brief discussions. I highly encourage asking questions, but have goals in mind when you go into these different events. Do you want to just learn about new jobs? Do you have specific questions you're asking for? Are you actively looking for a position? These are all things you need to understand as you go into these events, because it helps you approach the people appropriately. Always be professional. I always joke, 2 drink maximum at any network event if it's in person. Remember, you're always being looked at, you're always being evaluated, and that's something to keep in mind as you approach these different events. Something else you want to have is have that elevator pitch. And it's something within the industry itself, or non-academic, we want to, and even academic, you need to have that short elevator pitch, ready to talk about what you do and what you want. You want to keep it short and simple, but you also don't want to dumb it down too much, and you also don't want to be over their head. So you're going to need to practice this. This is actually what's in blue there is something that I would say. You know, I lead a team that's evaluating nighttime scratching and sleep. We're doing this by evaluating the use of digital wearables, something like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. They measure your movement, and using analytics, we're able to tell a patient or a doctor exactly how much a person is scratching and sleeping at night. I'm looking for opportunities that will continue to expand my skills in this area and be a champion for digital measures in medicine, and to take something that was traditionally qualitative, such as a how do you feel, to more of a quantitative physiological endpoint, providing valuable information for both the patient, researchers, and clinicians. So I took something that's relatively complex that I took hours on, I condensed it to a short statement. I can give this quickly, whether it's to my CEO or to just someone casually walking down the street. Both will understand, and it won't be over their head. So practice this. It's really important to have that down to 30 seconds or a minute. You never know how long you're going to have someone's attention. So having that information is really valuable. And I'm going to give you a different online presence. We tend to work in LinkedIn more so than Twitter. In fact, I tend to only go to my Twitter off and on, but I am in LinkedIn pretty frequently. You can also build that network online. Make sure you have a clean social media account as well. And what I mean by this is we will Google you. And you want to make sure those things that come up on Google are things that you want others to see. I highly recommend everybody Google yourself now and then, just to make sure that what those things people see will come up as what you want them to see. And again, utilize LinkedIn. Network with folks on there. If you have something, I know I have a variety of graduate students, et cetera, that link in with me and ask questions. And it's a great opportunity. If you catch them in the right mood, they'll give you some answers and start that networking, especially in industry. Curriculum vitae versus your resume, or your CV versus your resume. They really are different. And it's challenging to some. You're going to hear a lot of different advice with regards to a resume, and this is just mine. I see a lot of these in various roles. In your curriculum vitae, you're providing your CV, you're providing a comprehensive history of your education and research achievements. Even now, even with the abbreviated one, you still have an exhaustive list of your education, all the things that you've done, et cetera. And that's what it is. It's a list. It's very important for you to have. It's as long as you want it to be. I've seen ones that are books. When it comes to resume, at this point, I appreciate you have a lot that you've done, but you want to catch that attention of your future employer. You want to highlight those qualifications for that specific job. You want to be concise with your work experience, skills, and credentials. Usually they're around 1 to 3 pages. Mine's a little longer right now. In fact, I'm even probably going to condense my own. But you want to keep it relatively short. Some will tell you only 1 page. I'll argue against that. If you're a graduate or a postdoc, you have some publications. You want to demonstrate your knowledge. So it can be a little bit longer, but you don't want a 20-page resume. Just a few pages. And they're only really going to look at the first couple anyway. So get that information you want up front. For either CV or resume, spell check it, grammar check it, have other people read it. And also, please make sure your email address isn't dorky. Keep it tight and something that's really professional. There's nothing worse than getting a resume that has, something really silly as their email address up front. Also, when it comes to your resume, something to think about is you just don't want a laundry list of items. You want to be concise, but you want to add those details and impact. So here is an example. Skills and experience. I'm a leader because that's often something that's asked for. I'm skilled at artificial machine learning and subject matter expert in heart rate variability. Those are great things, but I'm not telling my future employer what I could really do. I'm a leader. Well, how are you a leader? What kind of impact did you have? So what if I took those 3 things and kind of changed it up a little bit, added some details and impact? So champion for improvement instead of skills and experience, because that's something that was a buzzword I read in one of the job ads. I'm a champion for improvement. I created and led a team that evaluated the use of artificial machine learning to predict clinical cardiovascular safety findings from preclinical findings presented at international scientific conferences. I also implemented new study paradigms for evaluating autonomic control for cardiovascular changes observed using heart rate variability. So the same 3 things I just gave, I now gave context to. I explained that there was impact. I demonstrated that I was a leader and also a team player, all by just changing up the word a little bit and giving a little more information to what I did. So those are things that I want to see in a resume. I want to understand more than just laundry list. I want to see how you impacted it a little bit. But again, you still want to keep it short and sweet. Making resumes is work. You really want to make sure you gear your resume to the position you're applying for. You want to highlight the areas of emphasis for that job listing. You want to make sure you emphasize your collaborative and matrixed work. We work, as I stated earlier, in teams. But at the same time, you still want to highlight you're a good individual and then you're bringing something to the table. And you also want to highlight what your future employer needs to know right up front. I appreciate that you have a PhD. You wouldn't have gotten to my desk if you didn't have a PhD. It was one of the requirements. HR would have kicked you out if you didn't have it. I wouldn't have even seen your resume. So I don't necessarily want your PhD credentials right up front. I want to know what your skills are. What are you going to bring to the table? And those are the things I really want highlighted on that front page. You want to highlight how you fit that position. And this is important as well. You want to have that cover letter highlighting how you fit the position. And this is an opportunity to get a little more verbiage, explain your qualifications, but you don't necessarily want to repeat your resume. This is also an opportunity, if you don't have something they're requesting in that job ad, to add that and maybe explain, hey, I might not be good at X, but I'm in the process of learning that. And by doing this, I've done X, Y, and Z. And it's a way to actually kind of really say how you're going to be valuable to them. Also, something to note is don't forget the keywords that are in that position announcement. Often resumes go through an automated system that's looking for keywords. They also will go through HR before it even gets to me as the hiring manager. And they're looking for, again, keywords and meanings. So those are things you want to make sure you have in both your cover letter and or resume. Interview, come prepared. Know the background of those interviewing you. And this should be the same within academics as well. Know who you're talking to. And know the business. So if you're interviewing at a pharma, know the pipeline. What do they have in it? Know about the company. Those are valuable things to have. Look at sample questions. There's tons of them published online, but have some answers in mind. We're given lists here. I have a list of questions I can ask if I get stumped or if I need something to talk about. I would hope that whoever I'm interviewing has some general ideas as we go into it. If you're asked to give a scientific talk, be prepared to do it virtually. And remember, you may have a mixed audience. So we often have applicants come in and give a scientific talk. That's great, but it is slightly different than in the academic world. You'll be talking, if you're in person, you may come in and talk to a small group in the room, but you also may be projected virtually to 4 different sites. So there are things that you need to kind of be prepared in how to do that. Also, have questions prepared. Ask for clarification of the acronyms if you don't understand. Something that we're heavy with in pharma is acronyms. Even to this day, I'll be asking people in my meetings, and I've been in industry for a while, what an acronym means. Don't hesitate to ask. Also, ask job-specific questions or ask for clarities and details on the role. Will I have direct reports? Is this going to be strictly lab-based, or am I going to have a non-lab portion? Are there opportunities for advancement? So where am I going to go next? What does your company X do to further develop me? And other questions. Remember, you're determining if it's a good fit for you at the same time as they're evaluating your fit to the team. If you're actually in an interview, they're seeing how well you're going to fit with the team, and you need to determine whether you're going to fit with that group as well, because this is a team, again, environment, and you want to make sure you all get along. So you can ask simple questions. What's your day like? What are your expectations? Are scientific societies encouraged? Are you supported? Can you go to meetings? All those different types of questions. You can always say, what's your favorite part? What's your least favorite? Those are things that I wouldn't be surprised to hear in an interview, and have. Working in large pharma, I wanted to just give out some pros and cons. So I definitely work in large pharma. I truly do feel I'm in the front lines helping patients. Our motto is patients first, and I still feel that. I love the teamwork aspect. I'm sitting in a room full of people that are well-versed in what they do. There's a lot of scientific challenges. It's a very fluid environment. So I could be working on one project and get excited by another and be transferred the next day to another. The people could be wonderful. And I love to travel, so it provides a lot of opportunities for that as well. But some of the cons, there's a lot of teamwork. So if you don't necessarily agree with someone, it can get really interesting. Again, a fluid environment. If I'm working on project A and someone above me says, oh no, we're now going to shift our emphasis to this other project, you may have to walk away from something, and that goes along with the changing portfolio priorities and needs. Pfizer one day decided they didn't want to work in neuroscience, and within one day we closed the whole program. A lot of people shifted. They shifted their resources to some other area. Others found other positions, but it is something that can be disruptive. Similar with people, there's great things about people and there's not, and you have to learn to work with them. And something that pharma is very good at is process. We have a lot of SOPs. We have a lot of trainings that we do. There's a lot of process and forms that go out, and it can get tedious. So as a simple final advice, ask questions, learn about the jobs and determine the right fit. Learn about all the different types of position. If you like to write, maybe medical writer is free. If you like discussing government, regulatory may be your space. If you really love the bench, there's bench positions. I highly recommend having mentor or mentors within industry. I still do. I have several in different levels, as well as in different companies. You can always learn from them and how to handle things. Be patient. That's just pretty straightforward. There's a lot of different positions. Be patient as you go forward. Don't be too picky. Think broadly. I'm not necessarily going to start looking for, when I started, I didn't look for cardiovascular positions that studied intracellular signaling. I thought broadly about how I could apply what my interests were. It is most often a team environment, so make sure you can play in that space. Keep an open mind. When it comes to looking for a position, don't start looking too late, i.e. I need a position in a month, or even too early. I won't be ready to take the position for a year. Just to kind of give you an idea, I interviewed in October for my original position at Pfizer. I asked when I could start, and they said, well, we want you immediately. And I was like, ooh. So I was able to postpone that for several months due to my current position. But they do usually want you relatively quickly. So you don't necessarily want to wait too long or start too early. It all boils down to just being patient as you go forward through the process. And lastly, good luck. Similar to Dr. Gumz, at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. And as we move forward, I hope this was helpful.
All right. So first, I would like to thank our both speakers for great presentations. I think you really touched on many aspects and answered many of the questions that our trainees have when they're thinking about what's the next step after the grad school, for example. We have multiple questions for you, so I will try to read as many as I can. And probably due to the lack of time, we won't be able to answer all of them, but we're going to try to cover as many as we can. So I would like to combine two questions to start with. First, what are some of the most important differences between academic versus industry postdoc position? And adding to that, what is the best time to actually start looking for a postdoc position? So I guess this is the question for both our speakers.
Well, I'll take the part. So I would say, it's never too early in terms of an academic postdoc, because like thinking about my own lab, if I want to invite someone to join my lab, I have to make sure that I have funding for them and support for their project. So for example, one of the postdocs in my lab, Dr. Ryan Crislip, we first started talking about a position in my lab probably 2 years before he actually defended. And so we'd, see each other at meetings and keep in contact. And so I think that worked out quite well. And the same for a new postdoc that's going to be joining our group next year. We've been meeting with her virtually now and had met her at some meetings last year. And so that was probably 1.5 years ahead of time. And that gave me plenty of time to make sure I had my ducks in a row, so to speak.
All right.
Postdocs in industry, you're going to want to pay attention to the industry websites. There's usually defined windows when to apply. So you kind of want to keep an eye on that. As I said, I just recently got the call for proposals for postdocs within Pfizer. They'll have a 1 to 2 month window to apply for those. Also, though, it's that networking is really important, because I may reach out to somebody that I know in a specific lab saying, hey, I have this position. I think I may have identified a few people here where you can go. So that networking point is really important, because a lot of times I'm looking for very specific skill sets and I can identify those pretty quickly. So hooking up with me on LinkedIn or another way and saying, hey, do you have any type of positions coming in the near future? I may come up with something just because I like your profile, where we're going. It all depends. But again, look at the websites. They're pretty clearly identified when they're looking for positions. In fact, one of them I was going to post actually just closed today. So you just got to pay attention to those. And there are some differences between academic and industry postdocs and the respect of what you do, but they both have defined projects. They both encourage publication. I personally feel if you get an industry postdoc, you could still switch back to academics and vice versa without any issue. Part of the postdoc in industry is something we have to be able to apply and you can publish and work in. And so that allows you to kind of flux between the two. So if it's something you're interested in, it's a great way to check out industry, but it's also still provides you some flexibility to move back to academia if you need to or want to.
That's great. Thank you. So there's a very nice, quite a long comment and few questions combined, but I'm going to just go through it because I think it's quite interesting. So there is a question about one thing I feel less delighted with within academia is to deal with gaining funds for lab. There is both pressure and stress regarding gaining financial support. How do you see it in the industry? And the bottom line of this question is the people that are working in an industry also needs to, be worried about funding their research without any, do they have any concerns about the funding?
Oh, budget's always an issue. Budget is something that occurs in an industry just similar to academics. You don't have as much control over it in the respect of it depends on, that's what I said, knowing the portfolio where the emphasis is for that company is really important. And you may be asked to change. So you may be an expert in this and your funding runs out in the respect of they decide to move on from that target to something else. you'll have an opportunity to look for a new position in another company, or we call it being change agile. Be willing to move over to a slightly different position. There's still opportunities beyond your day job also to apply for grant money, if you will. One of my projects was actually funded that way. So we do have internal projects that you can do as for fun, and we do them to kind of satisfy that individual need as well. But yeah, money's still an issue. You just don't apply for it in a grant form. But having that skill set is very valuable, because remember, I'm pitching my scientific target ideas to people that are above me. So while I might not be writing a grant to NIH, I'm now pitching a grant to my leadership saying, hey, I want you to look at this target for this reason. And having those skill sets of being able to be persuasive and have data from literature, et cetera, is so valuable. So it's not your traditional grant, but you're still fighting for money against other projects, and you have to show value. So just slightly different in how it's done, but it's still there.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question is, how long should I anticipate a postdoc taking? Should I anticipate doing more than one?
That's a great question. I'll use my experience as an example. I remember thinking at the end of graduate school, when I was looking for postdoc positions, that when I was being recruited to go to graduate school, no one had mentioned to me that there would be 5 to 6, maybe more years after of additional training that was needed. And I think something that's changed over the last several years for the better is that, the NIH has realized that, postdocs that are stretching out to 6, 7 years or longer are really not good for the trainees. And so there's, been a number of initiatives to shorten that time frame. So I think it's fair to say that 4 years is probably a good amount of time. I mean, depending on how your project goes, and if you become competitive for independent funding in less than that, definitely apply for a variety of different grants. I think from, within our system, within the NIH and some foundations that are, related to the kind of work we do, the American Heart Association and the American Society of Nephrology, they offer some career development awards that kind of bridge that, maybe you've been a postdoc for 2 or 3 years and now you're ready to move into more of an independent position. And so it's another example of kind of always thinking ahead, that, you start your postdoc and hopefully you have a fellowship, and then you think ahead to the next grant that you're going to apply for, and make sure that you have the things in place to be competitive for that next step.
All right, thank you. And I think it's going to be our...
are usually 2 to 4. Yep, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap with the last one that is going to be for both our speakers. So we have a comment. Thank you, Dr. Gumz and Dr. Northcott, such motivating, inspiring, and grounding talks. I'm finishing my dissertation. I'm interested in pursuing a career in the industry, but would love to maintain some academic activities teaching. Is that possible, or not reasonable to think one can pursue both, or maybe get the teaching opportunities in the industry?
You can do both. I've had several colleagues teach on the side. You have to get special permission usually, because you're doing something else. You have to finish your day job. But if it's something that you want to do on the side, it is something you can pursue, as long as you talk with your manager and are upfront and straightforward with that. I wouldn't necessarily do it right out of the gate. We say that because it takes about, we'd say 3 months to a year to kind of get used to industry and what's going on. Once you do that and you still want to teach, it's definitely possible. And there's ways you're teaching also within industry as well. As I'm here talking to you guys, you can still be actively involved in a lot of different things, and they highly encourage it. So, yep, totally doable.
All right. Well, I would like to thank our speakers for really, on behalf of our trainees, to help understand some of the transitions phase and the opportunities that they have within the academia and the industry. We're going to try to answer all the questions. So for all the trainees, don't worry if you didn't get your particular question. We will try to do that later. Thank you very much, Dr. Gumz and Dr. Northcott, for your outstanding presentations. And I just want to mention that next week we have the last the third seminar from our series, and our speakers are going to be Dr. Carmen de Miguel, who is the assistant professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, as well as Scott Steen, who's our executive director of the APS, and they're going to be talking about professional engagement outside of the laboratory settings. And this is going to be taking place December 8th on Tuesday, depending on what time zone you're at. It's going to be 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, our speakers, for your contribution and for your generous time and your sharing experience with us. And I'm gonna, I would like to look forward to all our attendees next week.
Thank you very much to all the speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.